The Discord server that ruined my life. True story. My smart home app told me I was alone. It said the front door was dead-bolted, the windows were sensors active, and the motion detectors in the hallway were silent. But data doesn't feel the way a human does. It doesn't get that prickle on the back of the neck when someone is standing just outside the line of sight of a wide-angle lens. This happened in Seattle, back in the winter when the rain doesn't just fall. It hangs in the air like a heavy gray curtain. I was living in a third-floor apartment in Belltown, one of those converted industrial buildings with high ceilings, exposed brick, and huge windows that look great in photos but make you feel like you're living in a fishbowl at night. My name is Leo Vance. I'm 24, and at the time, I was working as a freelance UI/UX designer. I also spent my spare hours, which was basically all of them, developing a niche indie horror game. Because most of my clients were on the East Coast and I'm a natural night owl, my schedule was inverted. I'd start my professional work around 2 p.m. and wrap it up by 10 p.m. From 11 p.m. until the sun started to bleed through the clouds at 4 a.m., I lived on Discord. I thought I was tech savvy. I thought I was the one in control. My entire life was integrated. My lights, my locks, my thermostat, even my coffee maker. Everything was tied into a central hub I could control from my phone or my desktop. It was efficient. It was modern. It was also, as I would later learn, a roadmap for someone who wanted to tear my life apart. The whole thing started with an invite. I've been in a dozen different coding servers, but the void was different. It was elite. You didn't just join, you were recruited. I received a private message from a user named Admin0. The profile picture was just a black square. The message was simple. We've seen your repository on GitHub. Your logic is clean, Leo. We think you'd fit in. There was a link, but it wasn't a standard Discord invite. It was a redirected onion link that required a specific handshake from my IP. I should have seen that as a red flag. Most people would. But when you're a developer and someone calls your code clean, it's like a shot of dopamine straight to the brain. I clicked it. I went through a 20-minute technical interview in a private chat where they asked me to solve encryption puzzles in real time. When I finished, the server opened up to me. The void wasn't like other servers. There were only about 50 members. The channels weren't filled with memes or casual chatter. It was high-level discussion about social engineering, kernel-level exploits, and deep web architecture. Admin0 was the heart of it. He was helpful, almost too helpful. He'd point out tiny bugs in my game's code that I hadn't even noticed yet. He knew my specific coding style, the way I indented my brackets, the way I named my variables. At first, it felt like I'd found a mentor. It felt like I was finally part of the 1% of the tech world. But looking back, the honeymoon phase only lasted about a week. It started with the music. I have a very specific playlist I use when I'm deep in a coding session. It's mostly lo-fi, instrumental stuff. One Tuesday night around 3 a.m., the music stopped. I figured it was just a glitch in the Spotify API. I went to my desktop to hit play again, but the recently played list had changed. At the very top was a song I hadn't listened to in years, The End by The Doors. I paused. I didn't remember searching for it. I figured maybe I'd accidentally clicked a recommendation or my account was logged in on an old tablet somewhere. I changed my password, logged out of all devices, and went back to work. But exactly 60 minutes later, at 4 a.m., it happened again. The music cut out. I looked at my phone. The Spotify app showed that I was currently listening to The End on a device labeled Living Room Hub. I don't have a device labeled Living Room Hub. My hub is named Leo's Main Station. I felt a slight chill, but I rationalized it. Seattle is full of techies. Maybe a neighbor's Bluetooth had crossed signals with mine. Maybe my smart home hub was acting up because of a firmware update. I unplugged the smart speaker and decided to call it a night. As I walked toward my bedroom, the smart lights in the hallway didn't turn on. Usually they're motion activated. I waved my hand under the sensor. Nothing. I pulled out my phone to manually override them, and that's when I saw the status update in the app. The lights weren't off. They were set to 1% brightness, and the color had been changed to a deep blood red. I stood there in the dark hallway. the only light coming from the faint red glow near the floorboards. My heart gave a weird, heavy thump against my ribs. I'd programmed those lights myself. To get that specific color at that specific brightness, you had to go into the advanced hex code settings. It wasn't something a glitch would do. I went into the void and typed a message in the general chat. Anyone else having issues with Hue light integrations tonight? I think the API is bugged. Admin 0 replied almost instantly. Maybe you're just tired, Leo. Red light is better for the eyes at 3 a.m. You should get some sleep. I froze. I hadn't mentioned what time it was, and I hadn't mentioned that the lights were red. I'd only asked if the API was bugged. I stared at the screen, waiting for him to type something else. The user is typing icon appeared and disappeared for 3 full minutes. Finally, he posted a link to a white paper on circadian rhythms. I told myself I was being paranoid. I'm a dev. I know how these things work. Maybe he just guessed red because it's a common night mode color. I turned off my computer, manually flipped the breaker for the smart lights to force them off, and went to bed. The second week was when the glitches became impossible to ignore. I was in a voice call with a few members of the Void, discussing a new physics engine. I was sharing my screen, showing them some progress on my game. Hey Leo, one of the guys, a user named Cypher, said, your desktop looks a little cluttered. What's in that folder labeled Personal Finances? I looked at my screen. I didn't have a folder labeled Personal Finances on my desktop. I keep those files on an encrypted external drive that wasn't even plugged in. I don't see that folder, I said, my voice sounding a bit thin. It was right there a second ago, Cypher said. Right next to your compiler. Maybe it's a ghost in the machine, man. The other guys laughed. It was a light-hearted, nerdy joke. But I wasn't laughing. I ended the stream and did a full system scan. Nothing. No malware, no remote access Trojans, no unauthorized logins. My firewall logs were clean. According to my computer, I was the only person with access to my data. But then, the Spotify thing happened again. This time, I wasn't even at my desk. I was in the kitchen, making a sandwich, when the smart speaker I'd plugged back in started playing. It wasn't the end this time. It was a recording. It was a recording of me. It was the sound of me talking to my mother on the phone from 2 days prior. I could hear my own voice saying, yeah, the rent in Belltown is getting crazy, Mom, but the security in this building is worth it. I dropped the knife I was holding. It clattered against the hardwood floor. The recording was crystal clear. It wasn't like a cell phone recording. It sounded like it was captured by a high-quality condenser mic, like the one sitting on my desk in the other room. I ran into my office and ripped the USB cable for my microphone out of the port. My hands were shaking so hard I almost knocked over my monitor. I looked at the Discord window. Admin 0 was in a private DM with me. He'd sent a single message. Security is only as good as the person holding the keys, Leo. I typed back, my breath coming in short, jagged bursts. How did you get that audio? That was a private call. He didn't reply for 10 minutes. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, listening to the rain beat against the glass. The industrial heater kicked on, a low hum that usually comforted me, but now it felt like white noise designed to mask footsteps. Finally, the reply came. It's a security test, Leo. We do this with all the new members. We find the holes in your smart life so you can patch them. You should be thanking us. I wanted to believe him. In the world of high-level hacking, penetration testing is a real thing. Sometimes friends do it to each other to help tighten up their security. But this felt different. It felt invasive. It felt like he was hovering just over my shoulder, watching the way my pulse jumped in my neck. I decided I was done with the void. I went to leave the server, but when I hovered over the Leave Server button, a window popped up on my screen. It wasn't a Discord window. It was a system-level dialog box. Access denied. I tried again. Access denied. I tried to force close Discord through the task manager. The task manager wouldn't open. I tried to shut down my computer. System update in progress. Please do not turn off your computer. I stared at the screen. I hadn't initiated an update. I reached for the power cable at the back of my PC tower and yanked it out. The screens went black. I sat there in the dark for a long time. The only light was the ambient glow of the city reflecting off the low clouds outside. I felt a weird sense of relief. If the power was cut, they couldn't get in. It was a physical solution to a digital problem. I decided I needed to clear my head. I grabbed my jacket and my keys. I needed to walk, to feel the cold air, to remind myself that the real world still existed outside of a liquid crystal display. I took the elevator down to the lobby. The building was quiet. Most of my neighbors were normal people, tech workers at Amazon or Microsoft who kept regular hours. I was the only one moving through the halls at 2 a.m. I walked out of the front doors and onto the sidewalk. The streetlights in Belltown have this weird orange tint that makes everything look like an old photograph. I started walking toward the water, toward the Olympic Sculpture Park. I'd only gone about 2 blocks when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from my Ring camera. Motion detected at your front door. I pulled up the app, my heart racing. I expected to see a delivery driver or maybe a stray cat. The feed loaded. It was a view of my hallway, looking out from my apartment door toward the elevator. The hallway was empty. But then I saw something. A small, white piece of paper was being slid under my door from the outside. I wasn't on the feed. I was 2 blocks away. Someone was standing right outside my apartment, in the blind spot of the camera, sliding something into my home. I didn't think. I turned around and started running. My boots splashed through puddles, the cold rain stinging my face. I reached the building, bypassed the lobby, and took the stairs 3 at a time. My lungs were burning by the time I reached the 3rd floor. I rounded the corner to my hallway. It was empty. The elevator was on the ground floor. I walked slowly toward my door, my hand on the pocket knife I kept on my keychain. There, on the floor, half in and half out of my apartment, was the paper. I picked it up. It wasn't a note. It was a photo. It was a high-resolution Polaroid of me, taken from behind. I was sitting at my desk, my headphones on, looking at my monitors. The timestamp on the bottom of the photo was from exactly 20 minutes ago, but that wasn't the part that made my blood turn to ice. The photo had been taken from inside my apartment, from the doorway of my own bathroom. I stood there in the hallway, the photo trembling in my hand. I'd been in the apartment. I'd been awake. I hadn't heard a sound. My smart locks said the door had been closed the entire time. My motion sensors hadn't tripped. I realized then that this wasn't a security test. It wasn't a game. I looked at the photo again. In the reflection of the monitor in the picture, I could see a faint shadow standing in the bathroom door. A figure in a dark hoodie holding a camera. They weren't just in my network. They were in my house. And I had just left them alone in there. I didn't enter the apartment. I backed away, my eyes locked on the door, until I hit the opposite wall. I pulled out my phone to call 911, but as I swiped to unlock it, the screen changed. A Discord notification appeared at the top of the screen. Admin 0. You forgot to lock the kitchen window, Leo. It's a long drop from the 3rd floor. You should be more careful. I looked at my phone, then at my door, then back at the empty, silent hallway. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The glitches, the music, the lights, they weren't the attack. They were the distraction. He wanted me to look at my screens. He wanted me to focus on the digital so I wouldn't notice the physical. And now I was standing in a hallway at 2:30 a.m., locked out of my own life, while someone, or something, was inside my home, watching me through the very devices I'd bought to keep myself safe. I pressed the call button for 911. 911, what is your emergency? I think someone is in my apartment, I whispered, my voice cracking. I have a photo. They were inside while I was there. I'm on the 3rd floor of the Austin building in Belltown. Stay where you are, sir. Do not enter the premises. An officer is being dispatched. I stayed. I waited. Every second felt like an hour. I kept expecting my door to creak open. I kept expecting Admin Zero to message me again, to tell me he could hear my breathing through the phone. When the police finally arrived, they did a full sweep. They went through every room, every closet, even the crawl space for the HVAC. "Nobody's here, kid," the older officer said, looking at me with a mix of pity and annoyance. "Kitchen window was open, like you said, but there's no sign of a struggle. Nothing's missing. Your laptop, your fancy camera, your wallet, it's all here." "I have the photo," I said, handing him the Polaroid. He looked at it, then at his partner. "This could have been taken any time. You live alone, right? How do we know you didn't have a friend take this as a prank?" "It's not a prank," I snapped. "Look at the timestamp. Look at the Discord messages." He sighed. "Look, Leo, cyberstalking is a serious thing, but without a suspect or physical evidence of a break-in, and an open window doesn't count as forced entry, there's not much we can do. We'll file a report. My advice? Change your passwords, get some sleep, maybe stay at a friend's place for a bit." They left. They left me alone in the apartment that no longer felt like mine. I walked into the kitchen and closed the window. I locked it. Then I did something I should have done a week ago. I went to my router and I pulled the power cord. Then I pulled the cord for the smart hub. I went around the apartment and manually unplugged every single thing that had a Wi-Fi connection. I sat on my sofa in the total, oppressive silence of a disconnected home. I thought I was safe. I thought that by cutting the signal, I'd cut the tie. I was wrong, because as I sat there in the dark, I heard a sound. It wasn't coming from my computer. It wasn't coming from a speaker. It was coming from the floorboards. A slow, rhythmic creak. Creak, creak, creak. It was coming from the hallway right outside my bedroom door. I realized then that the police hadn't checked the one place where someone could truly hide in an industrial loft. The dropped ceiling in the walk-in closet. I stood up, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I grabbed the heavy glass lamp from the end table. I didn't have a gun. I didn't even have a bat. I walked toward the bedroom door. The creaking stopped. I pushed the door open. The room was empty. The closet door was shut. I walked to the closet and gripped the handle. I counted to 3 in my head. I flung the door open. There was no one there, just my clothes hanging in neat rows. I looked up at the ceiling tiles. They were all in place. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I was losing it. The stress, the lack of sleep, the gaslighting, it was all catching up to me. I turned to leave the closet, but then I saw it. On the floor, tucked into the corner behind my shoes, was a small black USB drive. It hadn't been there this morning. I knew that because I'd cleaned the closet on Sunday. I picked it up. My hand was shaking. I knew I shouldn't plug it in. Every instinct I had as a developer told me that this was a trap. This was how they'd get back in. But I had to know. I went back to my office. I didn't plug my router back in. I kept the internet dead. I used an old, air-gapped laptop I kept for testing legacy code, a machine that had never been connected to my home network. I plugged the drive in. There was only one file on it, a video titled Archive 7 MP4 on. I clicked it. The video started. It was a screen recording of a Discord window. It was a channel I'd never seen before in the void. A hidden, read-only channel. The scroll bar on the side was tiny, meaning there were thousands of messages. I watched as the person recording the video scrolled up. It was all photos. Photos of me. Me walking to the grocery store. Me sitting at a coffee shop 3 miles away. Me getting into my car. Me standing on my balcony, looking at the rain. There were hundreds of them, dating back 6 months. They hadn't started stalking me when I joined the server. They'd invited me to the server because they were already stalking me. And as the video reached the end, the person recording it opened a folder labeled Live Feed. My breath hitched. The screen showed 4 different camera angles. They weren't from my Ring cameras. They weren't from my laptop. They were pinhole cameras, hidden in the smoke detectors, hidden in the vents. And in the bottom right corner, the feed showed me. Right now, sitting at my desk, looking at the air-gapped laptop. The video ended with a text overlay on a black screen. "We like the way you look when you're afraid, Leo. Don't go to sleep yet. The show is just starting." The air-gapped laptop was supposed to be my fortress, a clean slate where the outside world couldn't reach me. But as I watched the files on that black USB drive, I realized I wasn't looking at a hack. I was looking at a documentary of my own life, filmed by a director I had never met. The footage in Archive 7 was organized with a terrifying professional level of detail. Folders were labeled by month, then by day, then by event. There were clips of me sleeping, clips of me brushing my teeth, and hours of footage of me just sitting at my desk, illuminated by the blue light of the monitors I thought were my only companions. I sat there in the dark, the old laptop's fan whirring like a dying lung. I felt a cold, oily sensation wash over me. It wasn't just fear, it was a total violation of my reality. Every time I had thought I was alone, every time I had changed my clothes or talked to myself or sang along to a song, they were watching. And "they" was the operative word. The Discord window in the screen recording showed dozens of users reacting to the live feeds with emojis. They were treating my life like a 24-hour reality show, a twisted version of Twitch where the streamer didn't know the camera was on. I knew I couldn't stay in the office. I took a flashlight and began a frantic, desperate search of my own home. I started with the smoke detector in the hallway. I dragged a kitchen chair over, stood on it, and twisted the plastic housing off. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped it. I looked inside. There, nestled next to the battery compartment, was a tiny pinhole lens wired into a microtransmitter. It was professional grade, the kind of hardware you don't just buy at a local Best Buy. I found 3 more. One was hidden inside the mesh of the HVAC vent in the bedroom. Another was drilled into the corner of a decorative picture frame I'd bought at a thrift store months ago. The fourth was the most disturbing. It was embedded in the plastic casing of my own desktop monitor, aimed directly at my face. I realized then that my high-tech lifestyle hadn't been a convenience. It had been an invitation. I had built my own cage and handed them the keys. The next morning, the sun didn't bring any relief. The gray Seattle light just made the apartment look colder, more like a crime scene. I decided I needed to get out. I needed a hotel, a place where I could think without a lens following my every move. I grabbed my leather messenger bag and threw in some clothes and my laptop. I didn't touch the smart locks. I used the manual deadbolt. I walked down to the street, my eyes darting to every parked car, every person in a hoodie. I felt like I was walking through a minefield. I pulled out my phone to call an Uber, but as soon as I opened the app, I got a notification from Chase Bank. My account had been flagged for suspicious activity. I opened my banking app, and my heart dropped. There were dozens of small 99-cent transactions to various offshore VPN services and domain registrars. My balance wasn't gone, but the account was locked tight. I walked to a nearby ATM, hoping to pull out enough cash to get me through a few nights. I slid my card in, typed my PIN, and waited. The machine whirred for a second, then spat the card back out. Transaction denied. Contact your financial institution. I stood there on the sidewalk, the rain starting to mist against my glasses. I was 24 years old, and in the span of 12 hours, I had been stripped of my privacy, my security, and now my money. I felt a sense of powerlessness that's hard to describe. It's like the ground you're standing on suddenly turns into water. You keep trying to find a foothold, but there's nothing but the deep, dark cold. I needed to talk to someone. I needed to hear a voice that wasn't coming through a Discord voice channel. I called Sarah. Sarah and I had been dating for about 8 months. She was a landscape architect, someone who spent her days dealing with dirt and plants, real, tangible things. She was my anchor. "Leo, are you okay?" she asked as soon as she picked up. Her voice sounded strained, like she'd been crying. "Sarah, something's happening. My apartment. I found cameras. My bank account is locked. I think I'm being followed. I need to come over, please." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the sound of a TV in the background of her apartment. "Leo, I don't think that's a good idea," she said softly. "What? Why?" Sarah, I'm in trouble. I don't know who else to turn to. Someone sent me a video, Leo, this morning. Her voice broke. It was a video of you, in your apartment. You were talking to someone on your headset. You were laughing about how you were only dating me to get close to my firm's server room. You said I was useful for the social engineering part of the job. My jaw dropped. Sarah, that never happened. That's a deepfake. I've told you about these people in the void. They're hackers. They can manipulate audio. It looked like you, Leo. It sounded exactly like you. You even had that mole on your neck that I like. How could they fake that? They've been filming me for 6 months, Sarah. They have thousands of hours of me talking. They can reconstruct my voice, my face, everything. It's a trick. They're trying to isolate me. I want to believe you, she whispered. But then I got the texts from your number, telling me that if I went to the police, you'd leak my private photos, the ones from my old phone. I felt like the air had been kicked out of my lungs. I hadn't sent those. I didn't even have her old phone. But it didn't matter. The isolation protocol was in full effect. They weren't just attacking my hardware. They were attacking my soul. They were systematically removing every support system I had until I was left completely alone in the dark. Sarah, please listen to me. Don't call me again, Leo. My brother is coming over. If I see you near my place, I'm calling the cops. I already filed for a temporary restraining order this morning. The paperwork should be at your place by tomorrow. The line went dead. I stood in the middle of a crowded sidewalk in Belltown, surrounded by people, yet I had never been more isolated in my life. I looked up at the windows of the buildings around me. Which one of those glass panes hid a lens? Which one of these people walking past me was a member of the void, watching my breakdown in real time on their phone? I didn't have anywhere to go. I walked back to my apartment building. It was the only place I had left, even if it was a cage. I felt like a beaten dog returning to the person who kicked it. When I got back to my floor, I saw a DoorDash bag sitting in front of my door. I hadn't ordered anything. I didn't even have a working credit card. I picked up the bag. It was a large pepperoni pizza from a place 3 blocks away. I looked at the receipt stapled to the side. It was paid for using my stored card info on the app, but it was the special instructions section that made my stomach turn. You forgot to lock the kitchen window. It's a long drop, Leo. We left a little something extra inside. I dropped the bag. The smell of grease and tomato sauce suddenly made me want to vomit. I looked at my door. The deadbolt was still locked. I slowly turned the key, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pushed the door open. The apartment was silent. The air felt heavy, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. I walked into the kitchen. The window I had locked so carefully was wide open. The rain was blowing in, soaking the countertop and the floor. I walked over to the counter to close it, but I stopped. There, sitting right in the middle of the wet granite, was a single black rose. It was artificial, made of some kind of heavy, matte plastic. Wrapped around the stem was a small piece of paper. I unwrapped it with trembling fingers. Week 5. The physical phase. You're doing great, Leo. The server loves the way you look when you cry. By the way, your mother says hi. She's worried about you. We told her you were having a little bit of a mental breakdown. We told her not to answer your calls for a while. It's for your own good. I ran to my phone and dialed my mom. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I sent a text. Mom, pick up, it's Leo M. Okay, don't listen to them. A bubble appeared immediately. She was typing. Then it disappeared. Then it appeared again. Leo, the nice man from the health department, explained everything. Please get some help. We love you, but we can't enable this behavior anymore. Please don't contact us until you're in a program. I threw the phone against the wall. It didn't break, but the screen cracked into a spiderweb of light. I fell to my knees in the middle of the kitchen, the rain from the open window soaking into my jeans. I realized then the true scale of what I was up against. This wasn't one guy in a basement. This was a collective, a hive mind of social engineers who had turned my life into a project. They had my passwords, they had my voice, they had my location, and now they had my family. They were gaslighting the entire world around me until I was the only one who didn't believe I was crazy. I looked at the black rose. I realized they wanted me to feel this way. They wanted the total ego destruction that Admin Zero had hinted at in the chat. They wanted to see how long it took for a human being to snap when their entire reality was being edited in real time. But as I sat there, a tiny spark of anger started to burn through the cold fog of my fear. They thought they knew me because they had watched me for 6 months. They thought I was just a collection of data points and predictable routines. They forgot one thing. I was a developer too. I knew how to find bugs in a system, and every system, no matter how elite, has a back door. I stood up and wiped the rain from my face. I didn't close the window. I let the cold air fill the room. I walked over to my desk and looked at the server rack I'd built myself. It was the heart of my digital life. It was also the bridge they were using to cross into my world. I reached behind the rack and pulled out a hidden compartment I'd built for spare drives. Inside was an old encrypted USB bridge, a hardware-level sniffer I'd designed for a client a year ago. It was meant to detect unauthorized data packets on a local network. If they were still in my system, if they were still watching through those pinhole cameras, they had to be sending that data somewhere. And even if they were using a VPN, even if they were bouncing the signal through 10 different countries, the initial handshake had to happen right here. I sat down at my desk. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't check my phone. I just sat in the dark, the green LEDs of the server rack blinking like the eyes of a deep-sea predator. "You want a show?" I whispered to the empty room. "I'll give you a show." I plugged the sniffer into the main hub. I didn't go through the OS. I bypassed the kernel and went straight to the hardware layer. I started to watch the traffic. At first, it was just the usual background noise of a modern home, the smart fridge pinging its server, the thermostat checking the weather. But then I saw it. A steady high-bandwidth stream of outgoing packets. They were masked as system updates, but the destination IP was a rotating series of nodes on a decentralized network. I followed the trail. I didn't try to block it. I just watched. I felt like a hunter tracking a beast through a thick forest. Every few minutes, the destination would jump, but the signature stayed the same. It was a 256-bit encryption key that I recognized. It was the same key Admin Zero had used to invite me to the void. I realized then that the server wasn't just a place where they talked. The server was the command center. Every camera, every compromised account, every deepfake. It was all being managed through a series of automated scripts running on a private node within the void. And if I could get into that node, I wouldn't just see who they were. I could take it all back. But I knew the second I tried to hack back, they'd know. They were probably watching my screen right now. I had to be fast. I had to be perfect. I started to type. My fingers moved across the mechanical keyboard with a speed I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't Leo the victim anymore. I was Leo the architect. I found the vulnerability in their handshake protocol. It was a classic man-in-the-middle exploit, the very thing they'd used on me. I injected a small piece of code, a canary, that would alert me the next time Admin Zero logged in. I sat back and waited. The rain continued to pour. The red light from a nearby neon sign flickered through the open window, casting long, bloody shadows across the room. And then my monitor flickered. A new window opened. It wasn't a Discord window. It was a command prompt. "Nice try, Leo. But we've already seen your code. Did you really think we wouldn't notice the sniffer?" A second window opened. It was a live video feed of my mother's house. I could see her sitting in her living room, reading a book. One more keystroke, and we send the command to her smart stove. You know how old those gas lines are in that house, right? I froze. My hands hovered over the keyboard. The air in the room felt like it had been sucked out. Sit back. Relax. The finale is about to begin. The threat against my mother was the moment the floor truly fell out from under me. I stared at the command prompt on my monitor, the green text glowing like toxic waste. My mother is 65. She lives alone in a house built in the 70s, a place with a gas stove that has a temperamental pilot light. I had installed a smart home bridge there a year ago, thinking it would make her life easier. giving her the ability to check if she'd left the burner on from her phone. Now that same convenience was a remote detonation cord held by a stranger in a digital shadow. "I'm not typing anything," I whispered to the empty room, my hands held up like I was being robbed. "I'm done. Just leave her alone." The screen flickered. A new message appeared. "Good boy. Now let's talk about your car. You were planning on driving out there, weren't you? To be the hero? Check your dashboard, Leo. We've already updated the firmware." I didn't wait to read the rest. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the apartment, leaving the door hanging wide. I didn't take the elevator. I took the stairs, my boots thudding against the concrete in a frantic, uneven rhythm. I reached the parking garage under the building, the air thick with the smell of damp concrete and exhaust. I found my car, a late-model sedan with all the bells and whistles, GPS, remote start, lane keep assist. I hit the unlock button on my fob. The lights didn't flash. I tried again. Nothing. I used the physical key to turn the lock, and the second the door opened, the car's horn began to blare in a continuous, deafening scream. It wasn't the rhythmic pulse of a car alarm. It was a flat, unending note of mechanical distress. I jumped into the driver's seat, desperately trying to shove the key into the ignition, but the electronic slot wouldn't take it. The digital dashboard flared to life, but it wasn't showing the fuel gauge or the odometer. It was a single high-resolution image of my own face, captured from my webcam an hour ago, edited to look like I was screaming. Overlaid across the image in bright red letters was the word, "Stolen." "Stop it!" I yelled, slamming my fist against the steering wheel. "Just stop!" The doors suddenly clicked shut. The central locking system engaged with a heavy metallic thud. I pulled on the handle, locked. I tried the electronic override. Nothing. I was trapped inside my own vehicle, the horn still screaming, the lights inside the car flashing a strobe-like white that made my vision swim. Then, the GPS voice activated. It wasn't the standard female voice. It was a synthesized version of my own voice, flat and emotionless. "Route to King County Jail calculated," the car said through the speakers. "Estimated time of arrival, 10 minutes. Police have been notified of a grand theft auto in progress. Vehicle tracking is active." I felt a surge of pure animal panic. I grabbed a heavy mag light from the glove box and began to smash at the driver's side window. It took 4 hits before the tempered glass shattered into 1,000 tiny diamonds. I scrambled out of the broken window, cutting my palms on the jagged edges, and ran. I didn't look back at the car. I didn't look back at the building. I ran toward the street, toward the lights of Belltown, my heart feeling like it was going to burst through my ribs. I found myself at a bus stop 3 blocks away, huddled under the glass shelter. I was covered in sweat despite the freezing rain, my hands bleeding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked like a madman. People walking by gave me a wide berth, their eyes fixed on the sidewalk. I realized then that this was exactly what Admin Zero wanted. He was stripping away my dignity, my resources, and my sanity, one layer at a time. I was becoming the person everyone thought I was, a paranoid, violent wreck. I took a bus toward the suburbs, sitting in the very back, trying to hide my face. I didn't have my phone. I'd left it in the apartment after the screen cracked, but I had the USB drive in my pocket. It was the only thing I had left. I felt like I was carrying a piece of radioactive material. It was the source of my misery, yet it was also the only map I had to the person doing this to me. I arrived at my mother's house around 4 a.m. The neighborhood was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy and expectant. I walked up the driveway, my eyes scanning the windows. The lights were off. I used my spare key to let myself in. "Mom?" I whispered, stepping into the hallway. The house smelled like lavender and old wood. Everything looked normal. I went straight to the kitchen. The stove was off. I reached behind the counter and ripped the smart bridge out of the wall outlet. I felt a small, pathetic sense of victory as the little blue light on the device died. I went to her bedroom. She was asleep, her breathing slow and steady. I didn't wake her. What would I even say? "Hey, Mom," A group of hackers is trying to kill us through the internet, so I've been living like a fugitive for 48 hours. She'd call the hospital before I could finish the sentence. I went to the guest room and pulled out an old laptop she kept for checking emails, a 10-year-old machine that was too slow for any modern exploits. I sat on the floor, the only light coming from the dusty screen, and plugged in the Archive 7 USB drive. I needed to see it all. I needed to understand why. I bypassed the video files and went straight to the system logs hidden in the subdirectories. I'm a developer. I know that every hack leaves a fingerprint, no matter how much you try to wipe it. I started looking at the metadata of the photos. Most were from the last 6 months, but as I scrolled deeper into the folders labeled Old Data, I found something that made my breath catch. There was a folder named Beta Test. Inside were files dating back 5 years. I opened the first file. It was a screenshot of a coding forum I used to frequent back in college. I saw my old username, Vance Code, and a thread I'd participated in. I was a sophomore then, arrogant and convinced of my own genius. A user had posted a complex piece of encryption logic, asking for feedback. I had torn it apart. I remembered it now. I'd been brutal. I'd called the logic amateurish and fundamentally broken, and I'd even posted a corrected version of the code that effectively mocked the original poster's intelligence. The original poster's username was Zero Sum. I felt a cold stone settle in my stomach. I scrolled down the thread. Zero Sum had replied to my critique with a single sentence. "Thanks for the lesson, Leo. I won't forget it." I looked at the other files in the beta test folder. They were records of every job I'd applied for since graduation. Every rejection letter I'd received had a small hidden bit of code in the email header, a tracking pixel that sent my IP address and location back to a private server. They hadn't been watching me for 6 months. They had been grooming me for years. They had waited for me to build a life, to buy a home, to fill it with smart technology, to find a girlfriend, all so they could take it away when the impact would be maximum. This wasn't just a group of bored hackers. This was a long-term project of total ego destruction. I was the lab rat in a 5-year experiment on how to unmake a human being using nothing but data. I leaned my head against the wall, the silence of the house suddenly feeling like a weight. I felt a deep, hollow sense of regret. 5 years ago, I was just a kid trying to prove I was smart. I didn't realize that in the digital world, an insult never dies. It just waits for the right moment to become a weapon. I looked back at the screen, and that's when I noticed a new file appearing in the directory. It was a text file, and it was being written in real time. "You're finally doing the math, Leo. It took you longer than I expected. You always were a bit slow on the architecture side." I stared at the words. He was in the laptop, my mother's old, slow laptop that wasn't even connected to the Wi-Fi. I looked at the bottom of the screen. The Wi-Fi icon was grayed out, but the Bluetooth icon was pulsing. My mother had a smart fridge in the kitchen and a smart TV in the living room. The laptop had automatically paired with the local mesh network. Even with the bridge unplugged, the house was a web, and I was the fly. "Don't bother unplugging anything else." The text continued. "We're bored of the digital stuff now. Act 4 is about to begin. We call it the blackout." Suddenly, the power in the house died. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the wall clock, the glow of the laptop, everything vanished into a pitch-black void. I sat there in the darkness, the silence so loud it made my ears ring. I could hear the rain outside, a steady, rhythmic drumming on the roof. And then, I heard something else. It was a sound coming from the front door. Click. The sound of the smart lock engaging. Not locking. Unlocking. I stood up, the old laptop falling from my lap and hitting the carpet with a dull thud. I moved toward the door of the guest room, my hands out in front of me, feeling the air. I reached the hallway and looked toward the front of the house. The front door was wide open. The street lamp from the driveway cast a long rectangular sliver of orange light across the hardwood floor. Standing in the middle of that light was a figure. He was tall, wearing a dark, heavy parka with the hood pulled up. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, silhouetted against the rain. In his hand, he was holding something small and metallic. "Who are you?" I croaked, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. The figure didn't answer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. He tapped the screen, and a second later, the speakers in the living room, the ones connected to my mother's smart TV, erupted into sound. It was the sound of my own voice from a recording 5 years ago. "You're an amateur, man." My voice laughed through the speakers, echoing through the dark house. "Maybe you should stick to basic HTML before you try to play with the big boys." The figure in the doorway stepped into the house. He kicked the door shut behind him, plunging us back into total darkness. "The big boys are here, Leo," a real voice said. It was a low, raspy voice, nothing like the synthesized versions I'd heard before. "And the lesson is just getting started." I backed away, my heels hitting the baseboard of the hallway. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting a hacker anymore. This was physical. This was the moment where the digital shadow finally took a human shape. I turned and ran toward the back of the house, toward the kitchen. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I had to get to my mother. I had to get her out. But as I reached the kitchen, the smart lights on the stove suddenly flared to life, powered by some kind of internal battery backup. They were that same deep blood red color, and sitting on the kitchen table was a single black Polaroid camera. Beside it was a note. "Smile, Leo. This is the part where you become a memory." I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, the sound of heavy boots on wood. He wasn't rushing. He knew I had nowhere to go. Every exit in the house was controlled by a system he owned. I looked at the kitchen window, the one above the sink. I grabbed a heavy cast iron skillet from the stove and smashed the glass. I didn't care about the noise. I didn't care about the rain. I climbed onto the counter, but as I reached for the window frame, a hand grabbed my ankle. It was a grip like iron. I was yanked backward, hitting the floor with a force that knocked the wind out of me. I looked up, gasping for air, and saw the hooded figure standing over me. The red light from the stove glinted off the lens of a camera he was holding. Click. A flash of white light blinded me. "That's a good one," the voice said. "The server is going to love this." I kicked out, my boot catching him in the shin, and scrambled to my feet. I didn't go for the window again. I ran for the basement door. It was the only place left. I slammed the door behind me and threw the manual bolt. I fell down the wooden stairs, tumbling into the cold, damp dark of the cellar. I crawled behind a stack of old moving boxes, my heart hammering against my ribs. I sat there in the dark, listening. Above me, I could hear the slow, heavy footsteps pacing across the kitchen floor. Creak, creak, creak. And then, the sound of a phone notification. It wasn't my phone. It was coming from a speaker I'd forgotten about, an old intercom system I'd set up for my mom. "Leo?" The voice of Admin Zero whispered through the speaker, just inches from my head. "Why are you hiding? We're just getting to the best part." I realized then that the basement wasn't a sanctuary. It was a trap. And as the smell of gas began to waft down from the vents above, I knew that the blackout was just the beginning of the end. The smell of gas was faint at first, a sickly sweet scent of sulfur that drifted down through the vents and mixed with the musty odor of the basement. I sat on the cold concrete floor, my back against a stack of old high school yearbooks, and felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the fumes. This was the logical conclusion of total ego destruction. It wasn't enough to take my money, my girlfriend, and my reputation. To finish the project, they had to erase the architect himself. I looked up at the floorboards above me, listening to the slow, heavy thud of the intruder's boots. He wasn't even trying to be quiet anymore. He knew I was trapped. He knew the house was a pressurized bomb waiting for a single spark. My chest felt tight, every breath a shallow struggle. I tried to think like a developer, to find the logic in this madness, but my brain kept looping back to that college forum 5 years ago. I could almost see the lines of code I'd mocked, the arrogant comments I'd left without a second thought. I'd been so proud of my clean logic, never realizing that I was coding my own death warrant in a thread I'd forgotten within an hour. Zero Sum hadn't forgotten. He'd spent 5 years building a digital panopticon just for me. He had studied my life until he knew my patterns better than I did. He knew I would run to my mother. He knew I would try to hide in the basement. Every move I made was just another line in a script he had already finished. I heard the basement door creak open at the top of the stairs. The silence of the house was replaced by the low, distorted sound of a Discord Go Live notification. It was coming from the intruder's phone. He was broadcasting this. Right now, 40 or 50 people in the void were sitting in their ergonomic chairs, illuminated by their multi-monitor setups, watching a live stream of my final moments. I was just content. I was a high-engagement event in a private server for social engineers. I could almost imagine the chat scrolling by. LMAO, look at his face, or Admin Zero really cooked this one. Leo, the voice called out. It wasn't the synthesized voice from the car, it was him, Zero Sum. It sounded normal, which was the most terrifying part. It was the voice of a guy you'd see at a coffee shop or standing in line at the DMV. The gas is getting pretty thick up here, man. You really shouldn't have smashed that window. It messed with the pressure. You're making this way more dangerous than it needs to be. I didn't answer. I reached out into the dark, my hands fumbling over the boxes until I felt something cold and heavy. It was an old pipe wrench my dad had left in the basement years ago. My fingers closed around the rusted metal. It was a primitive weapon, useless against a digital ghost, but in this pitch-black cellar, the digital world felt a million miles away. I have the chat open, Leo, he continued, his footsteps beginning to descend the wooden stairs. Each step sounded like a gunshot in the cramped space. Everyone wants to say hi. Cypher says you should have checked the metadata on that black rose. There was a GPS tag in the stem. That's how we knew exactly when you left the apartment. We've been tracking your pulse through your smartwatch too. You're at 145 beats per minute. You really need to calm down. I realized then that I was still wearing the watch. The faint green glow of the heart rate sensor on my wrist was like a beacon in the dark. I ripped it off and threw it across the room. It hit a stack of boxes with a soft thud. You think you're so much better than us, he said, his voice closer now. He was halfway down the stairs. I could see the faint bluish glow of his phone screen reflecting off the damp walls. Just because you can write a clean UI, you think you're a god. But look at you now. You're a rat in a hole. You're the bug in the system, Leo, and I'm the patch. I stayed silent, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was thinking about my mother. If he was down here, was she still safe upstairs? Or had he already taken care of her? The thought sent a surge of adrenaline through me, clearing the fog of the gas for a split second. I couldn't just sit here and wait to suffocate. I had to move. I looked at the layout of the basement in my mind. To my left was the old water heater. To my right, the laundry area with the heavy steel dryer. If I could get behind the dryer, I might have an angle on him when he reached the bottom of the stairs. I began to crawl, moving inches at a time, my knees scraping against the concrete. Every time the house groaned or the rain hammered against the small, high windows, I moved a little further. I reached the dryer and tucked myself into the narrow gap between the machine and the wall. The smell of gas was stronger here, coming through the dryer vent. I felt lightheaded, my vision starting to swim with dark spots. I gripped the wrench so hard the metal bit into my palm. 0. Some reached the bottom of the stairs. He stopped, the light from his phone scanning the room. He was wearing a tactical vest over his parka, and he had a GoPro strapped to his chest. He wasn't just a stalker, he was a cameraman for a crowd of voyeurs. Come on, Leo, don't be like that, he whispered. I could hear the faint ping of Discord messages coming through his phone. The server is getting bored. Cypher just bet 10 grand that you'd try to rush me with whatever you found in those boxes. Is that what you're doing? Are you going to be a hero? He started walking toward the stack of yearbooks where I'd been sitting moments ago. He was moving slowly, enjoying the hunt. He held his phone out like a flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. You know, the best part of this wasn't the money, he said, his back now turned to me as he inspected the yearbooks. It was Sarah. Seeing her face when she watched that deepfake. Man, she really hated you. She didn't even hesitate. That's the thing about people, Leo. They want to believe the worst. You spend years building a reputation, and all it takes is one 30-second clip to turn it into ash. That's the real clean logic. I felt a white-hot spark of rage. It wasn't just about me anymore. He had used Sarah. He had used my mother. He had turned everyone I loved into weapons against me. I shifted my weight, my boot catching on a loose piece of linoleum. The sound was tiny, but in the silence of the basement, it was like a thunderclap. 0. Some spun around, the light from his phone hitting the dryer. I didn't wait. I lunged out of the shadows, the pipe wrench swinging in a wide, desperate arc. I wasn't a fighter. I was a designer who spent 14 hours a day in a chair. But I was a designer who was fighting for his life. The wrench caught him in the shoulder. I heard a sickening crack, and he let out a sharp, guttural yell. His phone flew out of his hand, skidding across the floor, the screen still glowing. The GoPro on his chest tilted wildly as he stumbled back against the water heater. "You little," he hissed, reaching into his vest. I didn't give him a chance to finish. I swung again, aiming for his head, but he was faster than he looked. He ducked, the wrench whistling over his hood, and drove his shoulder into my chest. I hit the floor hard, the air leaving my lungs in a painful gasp. We scrambled on the concrete, a frantic, messy struggle in the dark. He was stronger than me, his hands clawing at my face, trying to get to my eyes. I could smell the damp wool of his parka and the metallic scent of his blood. I bit down on his hand, tasting salt and copper, and he screamed, pulling away just enough for me to roll over. I grabbed the wrench, but he kicked it out of my hand. It slid under the stairs, lost in the shadows. "You think this changes anything?" he panted, backing away toward the center of the room. He was holding his arm, his shoulder clearly dislocated. "I'm still the one with the keys, Leo. I have the entire house on a timer. 10 minutes. That's all you have before the pilot light on that water heater gets a little too friendly with the air down here." I looked at the water heater. The small blue flame was flickering behind the metal grate. The gas was invisible, but I could feel it pressing in on me, making my head throb with every heartbeat. "Then you're going to die too," I said, my voice raspy and thin. He laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "I've been dead since the day you posted that thread, Leo. You took everything from me. My scholarship, my internship at Google, my confidence. I spent 3 years in a psych ward because I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. Amateurish. Fundamentally broken. You didn't just critique my code, you critiqued my existence. So yeah, I'm fine with this ending, as long as I take you with me." He reached for his phone on the floor. I saw my chance. I didn't go for him. I went for the phone. I tackled him just as his fingers brushed the glass. We rolled over the glowing screen, the Discord interface flickering as our bodies pressed against the buttons. I managed to pin his arm down with my knee and grabbed the device. The chat was flying by so fast I couldn't read the names. "Clip it, clip it. Is he dead? Admin 0, get up." I looked at the Go Live interface. There was a button for server settings. I didn't know the password, and I didn't have time to hack it. But I knew the one thing that every Discord admin fears. The delete server button. I swiped through the menus, my fingers slick with sweat and blood. 0. Some was screaming now, clawing at my back, trying to flip me over. He managed to get a grip on my hair and yanked my head back, but I didn't let go of the phone. "Stop!" he shrieked. "That's 5 years of work, thousands of hours of data. You can't." "Watch me," I whispered. I found the button. It was buried under 3 layers of security prompts. "Are you sure you want to delete the void? This action cannot be undone." I hit yes. "Please enter the server name to confirm." I started to type THEVOID 0. Some let out a roar of pure, unadulterated agony. He threw himself at me, his weight pinning me to the floor. The phone flew out of my hand again, but I'd already hit the final enter. The basement was suddenly filled with a different kind of sound. It wasn't the rain or the gas or the fighting. It was the sound of 50 different phones and computers all disconnecting at once. The Go Live feed on the floor turned into a spinning circle of buffering text. Server not found. The digital shadow was gone. The audience was gone. The 5-year experiment had been deleted in a second. 0. Some slumped over me, his breath coming in ragged, sobbing gasps. He didn't try to hit me again. He just lay there, staring at the dead screen of his phone. I pushed him off and crawled toward the water heater. The gas was overwhelming now. I could barely see. I reached for the manual shut-off valve on the gas line, my fingers fumbling with the heavy iron handle. I pulled with everything I had left. The valve groaned, then turned. The hiss of the gas stopped. I collapsed against the water heater, my lungs burning, my head spinning. I looked over at Zero Sum. He was sitting in the middle of the floor, his hood pushed back. He looked like a ghost. He was pale, his eyes sunken and vacant. He wasn't a mastermind anymore. He was just a broken man in a dark basement. "It's over," I whispered. He didn't look at me. He just kept staring at the dead phone. "You destroyed it. All of it. The archives, the footage of Sarah, the logs. It's all gone." "Good," I said. I heard a sound from upstairs, the front door creaking open. Heavy footsteps, but these weren't slow or deliberate. They were fast, urgent. "Police, search the house, check the bedrooms." The sheriff's department. Someone must have called in the car alarm, or maybe Sarah had finally called the cops after all. I tried to call out, but my voice wouldn't work. I just slumped there, watching the beams of flashlights dance across the ceiling of the basement. "Down here!" a voice yelled from the top of the stairs. "I smell gas. Get the mask." 2 officers rushed down the stairs, their tactical lights blinding me. They saw me, then they saw the man in the parka. "Hands in the air, don't move." Zero Sum didn't move. He didn't even look up when they tackled him to the floor. He was already gone, lost in the silence of the void he'd created. They carried me out of the basement and onto the wet grass of the front yard. The cool rain felt like a miracle against my skin. I saw my mother standing by a patrol car, wrapped in a yellow blanket, her face pale with shock. She saw me and ran over, crying my name. As the paramedics loaded me into the back of the ambulance, I looked back at the house. It looked so normal, just a suburban home in the rain. You'd never know that it had been a prison. You'd never know that every wire in the walls had been a witness. The officer who had carried me out sat on the edge of the ambulance bumper. "We got him, kid. We found the cameras. We found the tactical gear in his car. He's going away for a long time." "His name?" I rasped. "Who is he?" The officer looked at his notepad. "ID says his name is Arthur Miller, local guy. No priors. Just a quiet IT technician for the county." "You know him?" "He was a classmate," I said, closing my eyes. "A long time ago. I thought it was over. I really did. I thought that by deleting the server, I'd deleted the threat. But as the ambulance pulled away, my pocket buzzed. I reached down and realized I was holding Arthur's phone. The screen was still cracked, the glass biting into my thumb. I looked at the display. A single notification was pulsing on the screen. It wasn't from Discord. It was a private, encrypted message from an unknown user. "The server was just a host, Leo. The cloud never forgets. See you in Act 5. The message on the screen of Arthur's cracked phone felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. Act 5. I was sitting in the back of an ambulance, the red and blue lights of the police cruisers flashing against the rainy Seattle night. But I didn't feel safe. I felt like a target that had been moved to a different range. The paramedics were trying to check my vitals, but I pushed them away. My mind was racing through the architecture of Arthur's obsession. He hadn't just built a server. He'd built a legacy. I looked at the phone again. The message was from a decentralized app I recognized, an end-to-end encrypted messenger that didn't rely on a central server. If Arthur didn't check in within a certain time frame, a dead man's switch would activate. I knew how these scripts worked. I'd written them myself for clients who handled sensitive data. If the master user went dark, the system would automatically dump everything in Archive 7, every deepfake, every stolen photo, every scrap of banking data, onto every major public forum and leak site on the dark web. It wasn't just about me anymore. There were hundreds of other victims in those folders, people Arthur had been testing long before he got to me. If that data went live, lives would be destroyed in seconds. Sarah's private photos, the fabricated videos of me, the records of people's most vulnerable moments. It would all be permanent. The internet doesn't have an eraser. I waited until the paramedic turned his back to grab a fresh roll of gauze. I slid out of the ambulance, my boots hitting the wet pavement with a quiet splash. I didn't go toward my mother. I didn't go toward the police. I slipped into the shadows of the neighbors' hedges and started to run. I had less than 4 hours before the sunrise, and according to the timestamp on the unknown user message, that was when the final act was scheduled to begin. I needed to find the physical host. Arthur was an IT technician for the county, a man who spent his days in the guts of the local government's infrastructure. He wouldn't have kept the master server in his apartment or at his mother's house. He would have hidden it in plain sight, somewhere with redundant power and a high-speed backbone. I took a bus toward the King County IT building downtown. My hands were still stained with Arthur's blood, and my head was thumping with a dull, persistent ache, but the adrenaline was keeping me upright. I looked like a ghost sitting in the back of that bus, pale, bruised, and staring at a dead man's phone. I kept scrolling through Arthur's local files, looking for a MAC address or a server ID. I found it buried in a hidden partition on the phone, a device labeled vnode01. The connection log showed it was pinging a local gateway located at the county's secondary data center, a nondescript brick building near the port that handled the city's traffic light sensors and public Wi-Fi. It was perfect. High security, low foot traffic, and a 24/7 power supply that no one would ever question. I arrived at the data center at 3:15 a.m. The rain had turned into a thick, clinging mist. The building was surrounded by a high chain-link fence topped with razor wire. I didn't have a badge, and I didn't have a plan. I just had the wrench I'd grabbed from my mother's basement, still tucked into my waistband. I found a gap in the fence near the loading dock where the pavement had subsided. I crawled through, the grit of the alleyway scraping against my elbows. I reached the back door, a heavy steel slab with a card reader. I looked at Arthur's phone. He'd stored his digital credentials in an encrypted vault. I used his thumb, the print I'd managed to lift off the screen with a piece of clear tape I'd found in the ambulance, and pressed it against the phone's sensor. The phone generated a one-time access code. I typed it into the keypad. Click. The door unlocked. I stepped into the humming, air-conditioned chill of the server room. It was a forest of black metal racks and blinking blue lights. The sound was a constant, low-frequency roar, the sound of a million bits of data moving through the dark. I followed the signal on Arthur's phone, the vnode01, getting stronger as I moved toward the back of the room. I found it in a rack that was supposed to be decommissioned. It was a custom-built blade server, silent and sleek with no markings. It was the heart of the void. It was the machine that was currently counting down to the destruction of my life. I sat on the floor in front of the rack and plugged Arthur's phone into the maintenance port. A terminal window opened. Dead man switch active, T-minus 42 minutes. I began to type. This was the final battle, not with a man, but with a system. Arthur had built the logic to be circular. Every time I tried to delete a file, it would create 3 copies in a different directory. It was a digital hydra. I realized I couldn't delete the data. The only way to stop the leak was to destroy the encryption keys. If the data went live without the keys, it would just be a billion lines of gibberish. Noise in the dark. But as I reached for the key store, a message appeared on the screen. "Is that you, Leo? I knew you'd find the node. You always were good at following a trail." It was a real-time chat. The unknown user. "Who is this?" I typed back. "We are the Void, Leo." Arthur was just the librarian. "Did you really think one person could do all of this? We watched you for 5 years. We enjoyed the show, and now the audience wants a finale." I realized then that Arthur Miller hadn't been acting alone. He was part of a collective, a group of people who treated human lives like code to be debugged and discarded. They were watching me right now through the server room's own security cameras. "I'm deleting the keys," I typed. "If you do that, you lose your proof," the voice replied. "The police need that data to convict Arthur of the high-level charges. If you wipe the server, he walks with a slap on the wrist for stalking. Is your pride worth his freedom?" I hesitated. My fingers hovered over the execute key. If Arthur got out, he'd just start again. He'd find me. He'd find Sarah. But if I let the timer run out, the data would be public, and Sarah's life would be over. My mother's reputation would be gone. I looked at the blinking blue lights of the server. I thought about the clean logic I'd always obsessed over. I realized that some problems don't have a perfect solution. Sometimes you just have to burn the system down to save the people inside. My pride isn't worth anything, I whispered to the empty room. But they aren't your data points. They're people. I hit enter. The screen turned a blinding white as the script began to execute. I watched as the encryption keys were overwritten with random characters, then deleted, then overwritten again. The vNode 01 began to vibrate as the cooling fan spun up to maximum speed, trying to keep up with the processing load of the total system wipe. "No!" the message on the screen screamed. "You're destroying the archive. 5 years of work." "It's not work," I typed back, my hands finally steady. "It's a bug, and I'm the patch." The server let out a high-pitched whine, then a soft pop. As the internal fuse blew, the blue lights died. The hum of the machine faded into the background noise of the room. It was over. The data was still there, but it was locked away in a tomb of unreadable code. The deepfakes, the photos, the logs, they were all gone. I sat there in the dark for a long time, the only light coming from Arthur's cracked phone. I felt a strange sense of peace. I had lost everything, my career, my relationship, my home. But I had stopped the cycle. The police found me there an hour later. They didn't have to break in. I was waiting for them at the front door. The trial of Arthur Miller was a messy public affair. Because I'd destroyed the master server, the prosecution couldn't prove the full extent of the social engineering project. Arthur was sentenced to 8 years for aggravated stalking, breaking and entering, and identity theft. It wasn't enough, not for what he'd done, but it was enough to keep him behind bars for a while. Sarah moved to Colorado. She didn't want to talk to me. She didn't want to see me. Even though the deepfake was proven to be a fake in court, she couldn't look at my face without seeing the man in that video. I don't blame her. Some things are too broken to be fixed. My mother stayed in her house, but she never used her smart home devices again. She went back to a manual stove and a regular key. We talk every Sunday, but there's a distance between us now, a shadow that never quite goes away. As for me, I left Seattle. I sold my equipment and bought a small cabin in the woods of the Olympic Peninsula. I don't have Wi-Fi. I don't have a smart fridge. I use an old mechanical typewriter for my thoughts and a burner phone that I keep turned off most of the time. It's been 2 years since the night in the data center. People tell me I'm being paranoid. They tell me the void is gone, that the collective moved on to a new target. Maybe they're right. But sometimes, when the wind catches the trees a certain way, I hear a sound. A slow, rhythmic creak, like floorboards in a dark hallway. I still check my back seat every time I get into my car. I still look for the glint of a lens in every smoke detector and every vent. I know that somewhere out there, the cloud still has fragments of me. Somewhere, a line of code is waiting for a handshake. I thought I was the one in control. I thought I was the architect. But the most terrifying thing I learned isn't that people are watching. It's that once you've been seen, you can never truly be alone again. I'm living off the grid now, but I know the truth. The digital shadow doesn't disappear just because you turn off the lights. It's always there, waiting for you to click a link, to answer a call, to invite it back in. Check your devices. Look at the recently played list on your Spotify. Check the permissions on your apps. Because you might think you're the only one in the room, but the logic says otherwise. Arthur Miller is still in prison, but the void is everywhere. Stay safe out there, and for God's sake, lock your windows. The drop is a lot longer than you think. If this story made you look twice at your phone, hit the like button and subscribe for more true accounts of the digital dark. If you've experienced something you can't explain, leave a comment below. I might not be able to reply, but I'm always reading. Stay safe.